So that gives you a sense of what's happening. And, you know, if you can't get a home loan, you can't draw value out of your house, all the things that come with that, you know, it makes it harder to, you know, homes are a way into the middle class. And once we get a home, being able to keep that home together physically, to draw equity out of that home, usually is what helps cement us in the middle class. Now that's difficult to do across the South and West sides. So those are the kind of things that the book wanted to do. At the end, there's kind of a call saying, and we see it, although the book was written before the civil unrest that we experienced over the summer. The book says that we can no longer, as a city, maintain ourselves as two different cities in one boundary. That the city for too long has been satisfied with building this gleaming new city in and around downtown and in neighborhoods just west, just north, and just south of downtown, while letting the neighborhoods further south, further west, especially, just drift economically. Now we're seeing laid out in stark relief the issues that cause. So there's all of that in the book. Plus, it's a memoir. It talks about my father and, you know, and my upbringing and my family history. So so it's all in there. So before I get too long in the long-winded here, I want to show you a few images of the book and sort of give you a sense of what's there architecturally on the South Side. Now, let's see if I can do this right. Let's see. I don't know if I did this right or not. Can you guys see a blue bridge?
No, we see you.
All right, let's try this again.
There you go.
All right, okay, now I'm gonna get to the beginning. All right, so here's a cover of the book, as Megan says. In fact, that's a cover, that's the image of the book taken when I got my first copy. That's the first copy from the publisher, from Northwestern University Press. You can see the mail sticking out and tell me congratulations. But this is the cover of the book. It's the D'Angelo Law Library at the University of Chicago, and you know, it was picked for the cover by the designers, who I think did a great job. Marianne Jankowski at Northwestern University Press did a great job with this book. It's a beautiful book when you get a chance to get your hands on it through the library. She also liked playing around with the kind of reflection of the word Southern exposure in the reflecting pool there. This building, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, was built in 1959, and it's by Eero Saarinen, and you know his work, the TWA Terminal, which is now, I think, a hotel in New York, the St. Louis Arch. His you know, career ended suddenly, abruptly, because he died early, I think in around 1960. So this is one of his, or 61, this is one of his last works of his brief career. But just a great building on the University of Chicago campus, on the far south end of the campus, by the Midway Plaisance, by 60th Street. Sits way back off the street behind a fence. And if you drive down Midway Plaisance, you would probably not even notice this building was there. And but it's worth the trouble if you're ever in the neighborhood, like all these places are. Get out of the car if you can, go behind the wrought iron fence, you're allowed, and just gaze upon this this great looking building, Bedford limestone base, and this beautiful accordion glass box that sits on top of it. It's even better looking at night. You can really see it at night with the window, with everything lit up on the inside. It's like a lantern. So I think my oldest sister is on the line, so I'm going to embarrass her. No pictures of you. I'm going to tell her that now so she doesn't hang up the line. But this is my father, Lee Bey Sr., and me, Christmas, I think, of 1966. And I remember my mother telling me the story of what's happening here. He's giving me a taste of his beer, and then my mother took the picture, which means they probably are as impish as I am. As an adult. And in that image, and that whole image is kind of funny to look at now, because although I don't smoke, I can see the old man's Pall Mall cigarettes behind it. I do like a beer now and again, and I like coffee. There's a coffee pot over in the corner. And I like mid-century, that chair he's sitting in is cool. I wish I had it with me today. But the thing that my father gave me, his contribution, was an appreciation of architecture in cities. And what's interesting about it, the book really gets into it, is that I did not realize when we took our drives around, we went to various places, and I can remember going with him and with my uncle George, my uncle Herman, to see abandoned buildings, that I was drinking a lot in about architecture. I was just happy to be hanging out with the old man. And there's a part in the book, and I won't ruin it for those of you who want to read it, but the book begins with a road trip, essentially, of he and I around the city. And he dies early. He dies at 52, which is oddly enough, which was the same age I was when I was putting the book together. So it was almost like an interesting dialogue. You know, I could see him better as a 52-year-old as well. I could see him in a certain kind of relief, standing out in a way that, you know, wasn't apparent when, you know, when I was 14 or 15 at the time. And he takes me to Bronzeville, without giving too much away, historic neighborhood on the South Side, where he grew up. And 15 years later, you know, long after he's passed away, I become architecture critic for the Sun-Times. And the first pieces I write are about Bronzeville. And it was like the ride he gave me on that day kind of came back to life. And with Bronzeville, the Bronzeville series that we did for the Sun-Times, I mean, that really established me as architecture critic in the city and put me on the path to every good thing that happened afterwards. This is an image of my mother, my beautiful mother, Lula. Through her, I get an appreciation for art, movies especially, and an occasional Columbo episode, which I'll still watch. But this shapes the book in a different way too. In writing the book, I thought that it was just going to be photographs and a modicum of text along with it, until Jill Petty, my acquisitions editor, says, you have to write 20,000 words to go along with it. Now, my training in journalism at the Sun-Times, tabloid-shaped newspaper, is that you write tight economically. I didn't think I had 20,000 words in me, let alone about this at all, to talk about anything, let alone you know, this subject. And so I couldn't think of a way to, I needed a template, something to figure out how to write that long and how to carry a reader through all that story. And I happened to be watching Goodfellas, right? The mob movie. And of course, that came from Nicholas Pileggi's book, Wise Guy. And there, and this is my mother's kind of oblique contribution to it, the love of movies, which led to me to Goodfellas and of course, the book Wise Guy. I got a chance to sort of figure out a model for the book that basically Wise Guy in Goodfellas was a guy, an insider, who was basically saying, come with me, let me show you something. Let me introduce you to a world that you haven't seen before. And that was very much what the South Side was like. So there's a bit of it. If you look real closely to the book, you could see hints of it in the language here and there, but that allowed me to at least have a roadmap to go on. Now this is Pride Cleaners at 79th and St. Lawrence in the city's Chatham community. What a building. A hyperbolic paraboloid roof, a self-supporting concrete roof. And this is built as a dry cleaners, is a dry cleaners to this day. It's been fixed up since I took this photograph. But just a great building. And much like some of the buildings that you're going to see in the book and in this presentation, very little has been written about it. This building is startling. And I'm going to show you the sign in a few minutes. Nothing like this in Chicago. Built in 1959, designed by architect Gerald Siegward, who was a Chicagoan, graduate of Schurz High School on the North Side. Some of you North suburbanites might get a sense of the old Eden's Theater in this as well. Similar concept in terms of a hyperbolic paraboloid roof, a self-supporting roof that allows a column-free interior that allows you, in this case, to operate the tight confines of a dry cleaner without having to keep running into poles and posts and things. Not a landmark. And I was concerned about this building, particularly under this ownership. Again, a new owner has it now, because landmark preservation, landmark status preserves buildings, prevents them from being torn down in Chicago. And I did not want this building lost. So luckily, it's not a landmark yet. but a new owner who appreciates the design and the sign I'm going to show you in a few minutes has really gotten into it. I think the building has a good future. As this building, as you can look to the left, look to the right, and see a traditional Chicago neighborhood, buildings of the 1920s there. The main street that we're on, 79th Street behind us, is pretty much the same. It's just apartment buildings over retail, largely built in the 1920s. And this thing comes along in 1959, really as a kind of a disruptor. This building, built originally as Illinois Service Federal Bank, was kind of the same thing. It's at 48th, actually 46th and King Drive. King Drive is a stately, historic, late teens, early 20s, late 1800s, I should say, early 1900s strip. And then this building comes along in 1961. This building is like where you could imagine Don Draper kept his money, in Mad Men. I mean, so it's a modernist building, 1961. I should say that Illinois Service Federal was a Black-owned bank, started in the neighborhood, and then when they began to get their legs and get some financial security and deposits, they built this modernist building. Back when we had faith, same thing can be said of Pride Cleaners, back when we had faith in the future. It's been since owned, I should say, by a Ghanaian family, an African family from Ghana who bought it. So now it's GN Bank, but they still keep it up. I mean, they took the sign off, they put a real sign on the building now, not on the building, but in the parkway where the original sign was. They just took Illinois Service Federal's markings off and put theirs on. But they've really gone through some great extent to preserve this building. Before the pandemic, I was in some minor discussions to ultimately have a book signing there because the inside is spectacular, still from 1961, and very little change, kind of I guess a bluish interior, as I recall, but very, very, very cool. Check out the geometry of the hedges, of the shrubbery in front. I mean, very much of that time period. So that building is by, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's in the book. It's the Builders Bank and Construction Company, or I may have some of the words transposed, out of St. Louis, which did these incredible design build projects where the architects and the builders were all in the same company. And, they borrowed from the modernist vocabularies of the day. And, you can see a little bit of Gordon Bunshaft in some buildings, a little bit of, Philip Johnson in other buildings. They will borrow a little bit of it and kind of condense it down, boil it down to middle America. And as a result, come up with some pretty cool stuff. Because the story of the South Side and this architecture still continues, I wanted to put a building like this in the book. I did put a building like this in the book. This is the Gary Comer Youth Center at 72nd and South Chicago Avenue, not too far from where I was born. And this building, designed by John Ronan, architect John Ronan, a Chicago architect, is from 2010 or so. And it's a community center and has two interesting histories. Gary Comer, many of you might remember, was the founder and head of Land's End, the outdoor clothing seller and manufacturer and trader. And he was from this area. Grew up in the, white guy, grew up born in 1930 or thereabout. And, throughout the decades of white flight, other things, Gary Comer never forgot his old neighborhood. So, and over the years, he helped fund the school. He would, help meet needs in the neighborhood very quietly. Never made any noise about it. And then as he begins to die of cancer, he does this building. He puts this building into existence. And it's a community center, and it has everything in it that you would want, right? There's a cafeteria. That's that kind of bump out on the second floor above the main street. Right in the center of the picture. There is there's an auditorium space. There's recording studios. There's a rooftop garden. There's all kinds of things in here. And community centers, typically in poorer neighborhoods, look like bunkers, right? I mean, it's like if there is if there's the school to prison pipeline, architecturally, where schools and prisons are beginning to even look alike now, the first step in that pipeline typically has been community centers, which, oftentimes they're in neighborhoods that are deemed dangerous. So the idea is to hunker the building down, to close it off, brick, concrete, no form. And that way we're safe, right? And in this case, John Ronan, the architect, Gary Coleman, and the neighbors, residents collaborated to say, listen, the neighborhood is indeed a little rough, but can we come up with a design solution that doesn't make the building look like a fist? And as a result, you see color, you see form. What you don't see, which is really there, is actually those slits on the first floor, those window slits. That's actually bulletproof glass, bullet resistant glass. So there's realities that they're dealing with, but rather than to make that building reflect those realities and kind of yell back at the neighborhood, they create a building that's respectful of the neighborhood, provides all the services, but really becomes a beacon of the neighborhood. And the time as I've photographed this building over the years, the neighbors have come out and they're proud of this building. They're proud of this. There's no vandalism. There's no graffiti. There's nothing there. And this intersection is near the nexus of a couple of gangs that don't like each other, right? But the building is safe harbor. It looks like safe harbor and it's treated like safe harbor. This is a building that's out in the Pullman neighborhood, which is where I live. This is 111th Street, just west of the Bishop Ford Expressway, or old timers like me still call it the Calumet Expressway. This is the Method Soap Factory. And this part of the city was the city's industrial spine, right? This is where the steel mills were. This is where, metalworking and all kinds of things were happening in these big factories, most of which died away in the 1970s and 1980s and left these brown fields around, these undeveloped, potentially contaminated spaces that were vast, acres and acres and acres. What do you do with them? So there's a group here headquartered in Pullman, Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, which has really done a great job in past 10 years of embracing the area, as well as Maywood and some other places, and bringing homes and industry back. So one arm of CNI, Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, has restored homes, historic Pullman townhomes on the northern end of Pullman. But it's also done a great job of bringing industry and companies and a presence back to these brownfields. So Method Soap is a green manufacturer, and the building begins to embody that. The building was built, I want to say it was completed in 2015. But you can see solar panels to the left there, wind turbines. Inside, we know, those of us who may have a factory background, in our family or been inside factories, the factories can be tough looking places. This place where the soap is made is colorful, looks like Willy Wonka, just without the violence and the dark edges, but really is an asset. That green space that you see to the right of the photograph, extends back another block behind me, beyond me to 111th Street, and that's a bioswale, BIOSWALE, and what it does is it captures rainwater that falls around the property, and rather than release it into the storm pipes and flood my basement and everything else, it holds the water right there in the land. The vegetation is designed to do that, and then releases it slowly back into the ground. It's been a bit of a catalyst. There's Gotham Greens, which has opened up a factory there where they actually grow greens that you eat there, and other things happening. So there's kind of a new chapter being written for the South Side, and a new industrial chapter for this part of the far South Side, which is great to see. Here's our friend, the library again. Barack Obama, when he taught at the University of Chicago, when he taught constitutional law, he taught here. And again, the building is not in danger of being demolished, but is not as visible as it could be. Eero Saarinen was one of the giants of 20th century architecture, and his only real building in Chicago is this one. So I tell you, very quickly, there was a documentary on Saarinen that aired on PBS probably in 2016, and I'm watching it. And I'm a fan of his architecture, so I'm checking out all of his work. And the documentary, which was kind of co-produced by his son, is pretty exhaustive in looking at his work. So all of his college work, all of his everything. So I'm thinking, well, this building is going to show up because Chicago is the, first city of architecture in America, and this is a significant building. And the next thing I knew, the credits were rolling. I thought to myself, if a Saarinen can get lost on the South Side, can get overlooked on the South Side, then any building on the South Side is vulnerable, is susceptible. So that notion gave birth to an exhibit called Southern Exposure that was part of the 2017 Architecture Biennial. And then that biennial exhibit gave birth to the book. Just the book is an expanded form of the concepts that were in that exhibit. Now we're back at Pride Cleaners, and we're back because I wanted to show you this magnificent sign. This looks like a sign that should be telling you that Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. are going to be at the Sands tonight, right? I mean, blinking lights, everything. Now, the sign is not working, or the guy doesn't turn it on. Years ago, when I was working in the mayor's office, deputy chief of staff, I got, me and one of my compatriots there, actually got a previous owner, previous to the, 2 owners ago, back in 2004, to turn the sign on. And it still worked, but it buzzed and clicked. And I remember joking to my mayor's office buddy. I said, make him turn that sign off, because if we burn up the city a second time, we'll be in the encyclopedia along with Mrs. O'Leary's cow. So he turns the thing off. The new owner of Pride Cleaners wants to restore the sign. So I hooked them up with the city's landmarks division to hopefully find an expert there who can really get that sign going. What's interesting is that you see where it says shirts laundered. A sign expert called me up once when the book came out and said he believes that little square, the little white square, actually revolved. So if the sign gets back to the way it was, the lights will blink in sequence, spelling out Pride and kind of flashing a couple of times, and that little box will actually revolve. That's pretty cool. This is Chicago Vocational High School, 2100 East 87th Street. Most people see this building when they're leaving out of town on the Skyway or they're coming back in. And what I tell people in the book and every chance I get is that if you're interested in this kind of building, get off the Skyway and park your car and walk the length of this building. This building is almost 2 blocks long. This is the eastern edge, western edge we're looking at now, and it unfurls itself down 87th Street, and it concludes, a block, 2 blocks later almost, or maybe exactly, on the eastern edge, this is the western edge, with a gymnasium portion that looks just like this. This is the auditorium. And then the building kind of sits back and unrolls itself. And then when it gets to the east side, it pops out again here with this. So it's interesting that in a school designed to teach people trades, my major was print shop, learning how to operate a printing press, that they gave athletics and art this kind of architectural prominence on its main facade. The auditorium here is named after Bernie Mac, the comedian who passed away, very funny guy. And he was class, I think, of 76, 75 or 76, I think 76. And, I remember as a student here, I'm class of 83, you felt like you were like this Roman or Greek athlete walking in through this building, in and out of this building to gym, the times when you can use these front exits. Just a magnificent building. It's again, built in 1941, kind of this WPA modern, built for 4,000 students by the city leaders and school leaders who really saw the 20th century as a mechanized century, where there'd be air conditioning to fix and cars to repair and all these things, and that this was a school that would be on the cutting edge, that would teach 4,000 boys, because girls weren't admitted until a little bit later, how to teach them how to operate in this new world. My fear for this building is it was built for 4,000, something like 3,500 attended when I was here. The population is down to something like 800 now. So many of these large wings, and the school goes on, if we would, the school goes on to the north, which is straight ahead, another 2 blocks of shop wings, like little factories, little Art Deco factories all linked by a central hallway. Most of this is closed off now. And the fear is, without landmark status, that the school district will demolish these wings because the school is now 4 times too big for its student population. So there's a movement underfoot to give it landmark status, to seek landmark status for it, and hopefully it'll begin to play out into next year. As we're getting toward the end, so one of the things that the South Side does is it throws out these little surprises for you. I mean, the city is on a grid, as we well know, but if you go down the right street in the right neighborhood, you will find some incredible things. So this is Auburn Lake, which is a 2-block long lake that runs east and west. It's north of 1 block north of 79th, and it's between the Rock Island Railroad and making it to the west, which will be behind us in this photograph, and Vincennes Avenue to the east, which is again about 2 blocks that way. And it was built in the late 1800s as a suburb, very briefly, before the city annexed this part of the world, before this part of the region was annexed by the city of Chicago. And they used a spring, a natural spring that occurred. They capped it, they shaped it, they engineered it and preserved this lagoon. And then around them are kind of modest but interesting Victorian and post-Victorian houses around there. Now, when I was a young crime reporter in the city, it was like clockwork that almost every spring they'd either pull a car or a bunch of tires, or not too, infrequently, a body out of this. The neighbors, the alderman at the time, Terry Peterson, Father Flager, whose roots are in this area, got to talking to the city and the park district. This is 96, 97, to say, look, this is an asset. We should put some money into this. And they restored it. And they replanted and planted the edges and the trees there. They dredged and repaired the lagoon, and they stock it with fish. In fact, if you look real closely to the right of this photograph, you can see a man with a fishing pole right by the no swimming sign. And it's become a pleasant gathering place in the neighborhood, which has some challenges. But this is a place that's respected. And the cost, as I want to recall, was something like $2 million. And now, I wrote about this at the Sun-Times. That's been more than 20 years ago, where this investment was made, and it just keeps repaying itself over and over again. It's an asset to the area. Now, this is this house I dream about ever since, for years, but especially since writing this book. This house was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it was built in 1900 as a summer house for an attorney named Stephen Foster, not the Camptown racist Stephen Foster, but an attorney. And the house is located at 121st and Harvard on the south edge of the city, not far from the Calumet River. And this was a summer house designed, because this part of the city really wasn't built yet, part south of us, designed. The Foster house and the stables are behind it, where Mr. Foster and his family could get on his horse and they could ride a few blocks to the south, where the Calumet, where there was green, greenery around the Calumet River, and this was a way to spend the day. It's an early house by Wright. You can tell that it has Japanese influences to it as well, to the exterior. And this neighborhood is West Pullman. So many of you know the story of Pullman, where I live, where George Pullman built a town and a factory built a factory in the town for his workers, who were all devoted to building the Pullman Palace railroad car. West Pullman was like the next generation of this, where the West Pullman Land Company essentially buys all the, I don't know how many acres, but tons and tons of acres in the neighborhoods that are now West Pullman and a bit of Roseland and Gano, neighborhoods, towns that don't exist anymore. And rather than owning everything, they acted as planners, as master planners. So they decided, here's where the houses go, here's where the schools go, here's where the factories go. This was a huge industrial area at the time, where there was, Dutch boy paints and steel companies and all kinds of things down 120th Street. And the showpiece block of West Pullman was Harvard Street, which is the street that we're on now. We're looking, we're looking kind of northeast at this house, but that sidewalk leads straight north, which, is a street, if you know Chicago, that's not unlike, let's say, Longwood Boulevard in Beverly, where they put the cool houses. And this was one. The interesting thing about this house is that it's been for sale. It had been for sale for 1,000 days at the price of $175,000, which is dirt cheap for almost any house of 2,000 square feet, let alone a landmark, which this is, house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And this leads to the other part of the South Side and the issues that it faces. The problem here is the value of the house to a bank is not $175,000. They, with comps and things, you can get a house, foreclosed house here for $30,000, or a house in the market for 60 or 80 or 90. So there's a gap between what the house is listing for and what financiers, what the banks think it's worth. So the price of the house dropped down to $145,000 just before the pandemic, and there's been a deal on the house. It's been listed as contingent, since then. I don't know what's happening, but let's go inside for a second. Look at this stairway, right? So it's interesting. You don't come in, the front door, is not, the main interest of the house is not here in the front. This porch is enclosed and you can't get to it from the front of the house. The real entrance is the back of the house, where you can see a little bit of a Honda sticking out there. And you come in through here, and look at this stairway. I mean, I want to put on a tuxedo and walk down these stairs. I also want to pull up this carpet, but that's not my business. That's not my business. But a great looking house, and hopefully it finds the right owner and have a better future. This is back in Pullman again. This is 112th and Champlain again. One of those great surprises that the city does. The grid falls off. You turn the corner, you're liable to find anything. And in this case, in Pullman, which, if you know, is largely brick row houses, blocks and blocks of it, of various order. Here at 112th Street, it all falls away. You have these 4 buildings. We're in one now. There's one across the street that you can see behind the bicyclist, and then there are 2 more out of the frame to the west. And they form this kind of square around Market Hall, which is the kind of the remnant of the building you see to the left, to the right here. These built as apartments, still, are apartments to this day. Beautiful curved apartments. Looks like like you escaped to some place in Spain or Italy, right there. And this was built, particularly Market Hall, was built during the George Pullman's heyday. And the Market Hall itself was where the smellier things were sold in this, in this industrial planned town. So, vegetables and bread and that kind of stuff, were largely sold out of there. Part of the neighborhood folklore is that one of the operators in Market Hall during the 1800s was Ness Bakery, N-E-S-S. These were the parents of Elliot Ness, the Untouchable, right? Who grew up not too far from here, went to Fenger High School, just several blocks to the west. And the story is, during the Pullman strikes, these contentious strikes that ended up ultimately leading to what we celebrate each Labor Day across the country, that they used their bread, they fed the strike workers with bread from their bakery. That building is empty now. It's suffered a fire. It's kind of like a hulk that's there, and hopefully there'll be another use for it. But these 4 buildings are in great condition, 3 of them especially. Again, one of those great surprises. Now, every Market Hall building, every curved building is paired with a duplex. So there are 4 or 8, I can't remember, but there's each one has at least one duplex, and this is one. What, a study in symmetry and order. Beautiful brick building. Look at those limestone arches. You can see another Market Hall building to the right here. Just a great way to live, and a great piece of architecture. Again, at 112th and Champlain on the far south side. I think we're to the last couple of photographs. As I mentioned before, the story of architecture on the south side, again, it isn't just old buildings. I mean, it's constantly being added on to, but even the new buildings, don't get the attention that they should. So this building, the SOS Children, it's Levazario, the Levazario Youth Center at 76 in Parnell. It's designed by Jeannie Gang, famed architect from here who designed Aqua Tower and Solar Carve Tower in New York, and Vista Tower is completing. The skyscraper downtown is being completed. Just when Aqua Tower was being complete, and she and her firm were getting their just deserved attaboys, so atta architect, I guess, for their great work, they did this building. At a modest cost, donated labor, that kind of thing, which is again a daycare center, and got no press for it at all. And I thought this was an elegant little building. I want to say the budget's something like a couple $1 million, which more money than I've got, but for a building of this size, is very much very, very, very inexpensive. So you've got these concrete elevations of various colors to give the building kind of life and color and texture. Inside, if you look real closely, there's a staircase. The stairs are really wide, both in depth and width, so the kids can play on the landing, and they're taught there, they learn there, they interact there. It's just a great place. Daycare centers in poor neighborhoods are often as bleak as community centers are, and here was a solution to do just the opposite, to build something that's an asset in the community, and that treats the community with respect, and just a great structure. One of the other inequities on the South Side that architecture, design, and policy are beginning to heal these days is the fact that the neighborhoods of Bronzeville, we're talking about Douglas, Grand Boulevard, the neighborhoods between the southern end of downtown and the northern end of Hyde Park, predominantly African-American neighborhoods, are very close to the lake, but have very few pedestrian connections across Lakeshore Drive, across the metro tracks to get you there. And the bridges that were there were older than time. I remember the bridge that this bridge replaced. This bridge is at 40th Street, designed by EXP and Corrigan and Clark Associates. The bridge that this replaces was a rickety bridge, pedestrian bridge. And I remember back in '98, and again, this bridge is only a few years old, so it's a new bridge, but the previous bridge had to be from the 30s or before. Very old, very narrow. And I remember the space behind us where I'm taking this photograph. If we could somehow magically turn around, there were several blocks of high-rise public housing called the lakefront homes that were there. When the city in the late 90s, kicked off its transformation of public housing, it did it with a bang, literally, by imploding those multi-story high-rises, and then building new homes, mixed use, mixed income homes in their place. So I went to the implosion ceremony, looking to get a good photograph. So I thought, the bridge. So I stood on the old bridge, and before I got up there good, a cop comes right behind me, and he says, "Look," he says, "I got to tell you, get off this bridge." I was like, this is my shot, right? Because if you turn to your left, in this photograph, you would see them lined up, and I could just imagine what my shot was going to be like. And he said, "We don't think that the bridge wasn't going to be blown up, but he said, we don't think the bridge will withstand the stress of the explosion of the buildings. So, so come on down. I'm going to come down too." So the bridge did stay. The bridge didn't collapse, but I'm sure that thing shook. This becomes a great connection, one of two new bridges. The other one is at 38th or 39th Street, and then there's going to be another one coming online, I think, about 2 blocks south of here to our right, but just a way to give those communities access to this beautiful treasure of the lakefront. So with that, again, that's just a fraction of what's in the book. But with that, I'd like to open up the discussion and, and see what you got to say. What you ask, ask anything you like, what you saw, what you didn't see, whatever strikes your fancy.
Awesome. Okay, so be sure you can submit your questions in the chat. Be sure that you change the drop-down menu to all panelists and attendees, or you can utilize the question and answer function also. Okay.
Megan, should I read the questions, or do you want to read them to me, or how do you want to?
I can read them to you. So from PB, we have, why weren't there more bridges crossing to the lake?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one is Lakeshore Drive, in fairness, did shift around a bit in the 20th century. It was further, further to the east, further to the west. It wasn't always that part of it wasn't always right there, right? So as a result, that's one reason. I mean, it kind of moved around a bit, but also, just to give you a sense, I mean, it's 1,000. That bridge we saw is 1,400 feet. That's how much it takes to get you from the neighborhood to the lake. That's the Sears Tower laid on its side, and you walk across the surface. So as a result, that's an expense. But also, I think we can't forget about old-fashioned racism. I mean, we can see with aerial photographs in the 20s and 30s and the 40s that as that area became mostly African-American, predominantly African-American, there really was a concerted effort through, the position of expressways to the east, to the west, like the Dan Ryan, the construction of McCormick Place to the south. There really was a sense of walling off these areas from the rest of the city. So the lack of access to the lake from the Bronzeville area would fit along with it.
Okay, so I'm going to move over to the question and answer. So we've got a comment from Diane who says, love this presentation. If you have another one, I hope the library hires you again. Anything with architecture in Chicago, I love, best always. So
thank you.
I would agree with that. We have a comment from Kovas. If you could place the Obama Library anywhere on the South Side, where would you put it?
Interesting. My pick is, okay, and you guys know the story that they're going to build it if it ever gets built, and it is. It's just been delayed for all these years, and they're going to build it in Jackson Park, right along Stony Island, if you know the area between 7th and 62nd Street. Historic Jackson Park, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. There are people who really don't want it there, right? My pick was Washington Park, the neighborhood, not the park. So between Prairie Avenue to the west and King Drive to the east, on the south side of Garfield Boulevard, 55th Street, there is a CTA station and something like 20 acres of land that are owned by the CTA, the city, and the University of Chicago, which helped get this library to the south side. The library, in my opinion, should have gone there. You could have built an urban presidential library using the L as a kind of a focal point. The L could stop in the library, and it would have done so much for that neighborhood, and it would have been an asset for the neighborhood. Putting it here in the park, and the book doesn't, in my book I talk about it, I don't like the design, I don't like the tower, I don't like the approach. Putting it in this tight urban spot, but 20 acres is just about what it takes up. That spot is 19 acres, I think it takes up 22 acres at the park, but forcing it around that L, I think would have forced the designers, the architects, to come up with a better building and a more functional building, and one that really is an asset to the neighborhood.
Awesome. We've got a question from Peter who says, hey Lee, what do you think will happen with the steel mill property along Avenue and the impact to the Bush neighborhood?
This is a great question. So, the old U.S. Steel plant closed up, I don't know, 94, 95 or so, leveled, and now there are 500 acres right by the lake, right on the lake, literally right on the lake. There was a previous plan. I worked on it during my time at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill back in 04 and 05. in '06 to redevelop it for residential and parkland. They extended Route 41 into this in anticipation of a new neighborhood being built, and nothing's happened. In the book, I talk about this a bit and how obviously something there needs to happen, particularly when you look on the north side, you see the Finkel Steel site, which only closed up, a couple of years ago. Now it's going to be the home of Lincoln Yards, several billion dollars, $6 billion project. Why not 500 acres on the lake? But there really hasn't been a successful plan to launch it. There was the latest plan, I think right around the time I wrote the book, was a modular housing concern out of Sao Paulo, out of Brazil, was going to build houses there. That died. So now it's just there. And it's beautiful. My feeling has always been, make it a park. That's the one thing we do well in Chicago. And parks have been used to spark redevelopment. So rather than to wait till the housing is online to build the park first. Make it this kind of escape, which is what it's being used for now. And then let the neighborhood come around it, or if it doesn't come around it, you've got this great asset on the southeast side.
Okay, awesome. Great. Okay, so we've got another question from PB. So I'm interested to hear. This is kind of a technical question on Pride cleaners. How can that high edge hold snow since the 1950s without columns supporting it?
So the roof again is a self-supporting roof, concrete, and the bones of it is rebar, right? And one of the things after the war that we see the use of high strength concrete. Marina City is a great example of it. So the bones of this thing, there's a grid of steel bars underneath that, and the roof anchors to the ground on two sides, I think maybe three that you can't see from the image that's there. So as a result of that, it's fortified and it runs, and it's anchored into the ground. And as a result, the load of snow is negligible to that. It would be, it's as strong as a flat roof, or stronger as a flat concrete roof on a regular building.
Physics is everything, right?
That's right.
So Kathy has a comment. Some gorgeous buildings, things she never saw before. I love our city and you've given us more reasons to love it. So happy there are such nice community centers. We need more though. Are there any more on the horizon?
Yeah, the city is doing an interesting thing where, launched under Emmanuel, where they're linking, where libraries are kind of becoming that space, and they're putting housing. I think there's one that may be built in and around the Jane Addams houses in Little Italy. There's one on the north side that's already built, but there's this kind of but libraries are kind of taking on that role where housing is being built as part of the library, and the library kind of takes on this other function. There is another community center. This is one of the things about getting old. Actually, it's designed by an architect I know, who said, "Why didn't you put mine in the book?" And now I can't remember. I can't remember where it is. But yeah, I mean, but slowly. Oh, it's I can't. It just flew out of my mind. But yeah, here and there, when the budget is right, when the client is right, you are beginning to see these things. Not as good as that one, as the one that Jeannie Gang did, but at least informed by the same kind of good vibes and good desires.
Pat Z wants to know if you have other residential buildings in your book besides the Frank Lloyd Wright house, which I'm with you, that is amazing, and I would definitely ditch that carpet. Tragic.
Yeah, I wish that house gave me dreams. I wanted to buy it. Anyway, yeah, there are quite a few houses in the book. There's a chapter called, I think it's called To Live and Buy on the South Side, that looks at retail and homes. So one interesting home is a home by John Matusami. John Matusami was this interesting and wholly overlooked figure in Chicago architecture. He was Black. I hesitate to call him African American because I think his roots were in Trinidad, and I think that half his roots are Indian, like East, like from Indian, which is how he got the name. But Matusmi was the first Black partner for a major law firm, Dubin, Black and Matusmi. And one of the things that he did was he designed the Ebony Jet building, which many of you may know at 820, the former Ebony Jet building, 820 South Michigan. But he did a house for himself in the Chatham community on West Chesterfield on East 89th Place. And it's in the book. And it's a gorgeous little one-story house. It's from 1954. John Matusimi studied under Mies van der Rohe. So this house and Crown Hall are about the same age, but you can see the Miesian inflections or impressions, influences in the house. That's one that's just worth checking out. There is also a grand old mansion at 37th and King Drive that's in the book. I tried not to I purposely didn't put vacant buildings in the book, but this one was one that I think is in danger. So I put that in there. It was built by a prominent family called the Hammer family in the 1880s. And then later on, it was being owned by a prominent Black family, the Palmers. Lou Palmer, if you're of a certain age, in the South and West Side, or you might remember him. He was instrumental in helping launch Mayor Washington's successful campaign. He was a radio journalist and activist and that kind of thing. And they essentially created Harold Washington's campaign for mayor of Chicago in '83 in this place. The Palmer, his wife Georgia, and they both passed away. The house is empty and it's open and vacant and distressing. But yeah, so there are a few residential buildings in there, other modernist buildings in Chatham as well. But yeah, there are a few.
Okay, I'm going to close out. We've got one more chat question, and then I'll move over to the Q&A. So Claudette has a comment and a question, noting that you have a lot of historical architecture information. Do you have an opinion on the Emmett Till house and the attempts? I just heard about this the other day, actually, about it achieving landmark status.
I certainly do, Claudette. Claudette is my beloved older sister, so I got to answer this question, right? In fact, I wrote the Sun-Times editorials about this. So, we all know the story of Emmett Till, tragically, lynched in Mississippi in 1955, and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, who I once interviewed, actually, back in my early time at the Daily Southtown newspaper, made the courageous decision to let people see her son's lynched body. And these ghastly, gruesome photographs shocked the world and ended up being the catalyst for the civil rights movement. I mean, even now that generation that has been writing their biographies and things, whether it's Muhammad Ali, whether it's John Lewis, whether it's the late Rosa Parks, they all talk about when they saw that picture and what it did, how it sparked them to action. The house where they lived and where Mamie made this historic decision at 64th and St. Lawrence in the Woodlawn community, no one knew beyond a few that this was the house. No one even made the connection. It hadn't been landmarked, hadn't been remembered. The address never shows up or rarely shows up in any literature. And the group of preservationists in Chicago, Preservation Chicago actually is the name of the group, and the Till family, and they're still cousins and things that are around, have been pushing for years to get it landmark status. And this year, literally this month, the 65th anniversary of Till's murder, they got preliminary landmark status for it from the city. A new owner who just bought the building was like, I didn't know it was this, but now that I do know, I want to fix the building up and I want to do something significant with it. So there are scores and scores of these kind of buildings like this where the historic thing didn't necessarily happen in the house, but this is where they lived. Out in Maywood, Fred Hampton, the Black Panther leader, killed in the police raid in the 60s. His house in Maywood is up for landmark status. And there's a tier of these houses that need to be investigated Nat King Cole's house, which actually may be a landmark, or we know Mahalia Jackson's house also is a landmark, not too far from the Batusimi house. So the good thing about Tillman is that the Tillman house is getting landmark status for that opens the door to investigate these other buildings, these other types of buildings, which will tell a more full history of our experience, whether we're Black, brown, gay, straight. The more of these buildings that become part of our landmark portfolio, the better.
Excellent. One of his cousins was recently interviewed for a piece on NPR, and I think she was 7, just a little child at the time, but amazing memory and an incredibly moving testimonial.
We forget how recent this history is. I mean, he was killed just 10 years before I was born. People like Daisy Bates are barely old enough to be my sister. I mean, the history is that new. We tend to think of it, if it's in black and white, it's a million years ago and everyone's old, but this is really, really recent.
Yeah. Okay, Keisha would like to know what architecture you plan to cover in your next book.
Got you trying to put me back to work already, right?
Can't wait.
Thank you. Still figuring it out. And just to be honest, I mean, I'm concerned about the fate of church buildings on the south and west side. I think, and COVID just magnifies this. People are going to church less. Congregations are smaller. They are even before COVID. Maybe the congregations were smaller. They were aging. They were in these buildings that are a century old. Whether you're Catholic, whether you're Protestant. And I really fear for the history of some of these buildings. On the north side, where the market value allows it, you can see many of them being turned into residential, going from sacred to profane, if you will. They're becoming residential building. On the south side, where to turn a church into a residence or residential building is probably more than the building is worth, and the end result of the whole building is worth. My fear is that we're going to start losing them. And so that might be a thing I take a look at some point.
Excellent. Michelle would like to know if the buildings in the South Side have more or less tear downs than other areas in Chicago.
Good question. Historically, more, and then often leaving a vacant lot, in its place, not new development. But but as the real estate pressures on the north side are just becoming insane, you could see it happening. I mean, at first it was like maybe the odd frame building that was still around, when the neighborhood gentrified. But now you're seeing brick workers' cottages from the 1880s and 1890s being demolished, and larger houses being built in this place because there's that much money, there's that much value in the land there. I saw maybe just in the last week a row of brick 2 flats or 3 flats. I mean, really substantial stuff, the kind of buildings that you would see if you're on the south side in Auburn Gresham, if you're in the north side, that you would see neighborhoods like Ravenswood and the like, some parts of Park Ridge maybe even. Just, nothing wrong with them, habitable. Somebody had the money to buy 2 of them and tear them both down because they're neighbors and build a big house in its place. So I think the north side, has some things it's going to have to be dealing with pretty soon in terms of preservation and architecture.
We have another question. Why are these buildings generally not featured on the Chicago Architecture Open House weekends?
Many of them are, and I give the Open House Chicago kind of a shout out in the book. I mean, it's a relatively new endeavor by the Chicago Architecture Center now, and maybe not last year, but the year before, the book gives a number, but there were something like, I don't know, I want to say like 50 or 60 or 80 sites on the south and west sides. So you can see things that you would never otherwise get a chance to see. The inside of the Nation of Islam's Mosque Miriam, which was built as a Greek Orthodox church in the 60s, and the Nation of Islam bought it in the 70s. I mean, buildings like that you would never see. So I think, and COVID has put a clamp on it, I think that the idea is to expand that and kind of get these places. But even then, again, the South Side is the size of Philadelphia. It's a city south of Roosevelt Road. So, to get around, it's going to take some time.
That is an excellent way to put it into context, right? The size of Philadelphia, like that's an amazing piece of information to integrate into your thinking. Right?
It surprised me when I was writing the book. I was thinking, well, I have to tell people how big the South Side is. And the city is, 234 square miles. And originally I was going with a number. I think it's 186 square miles, 185 square miles. And I thought, no one knows what that is. So I started looking up cities, and Philadelphia, fourth biggest city in America, fifth biggest city in America by itself, that's just the South Side. And I thought that'll get people to thinking.
Mission accomplished. Another question from Michelle, who wants to know, besides the Museum of Science and Industry, what other still stand in the 1893 exposition?
You broke up a little bit, but I think the question was, what other surviving buildings from the World's Fair other than the museum?
Yes.
Buildings. There's I don't know whether, and I never found out whether this was folklore or not, but there is I guess a kind of a comfort station at 57th and the Lake, in Lakeshore Drive, west of Lakeshore Drive, that supposedly is one. But other than that, there's I think in Oak Park maybe there's a gate that was a booth. It has a kind of a hipped roof. There's a booth that was once the entrance to the World's Fair. But other than that, the buildings were made of, despite the fact they look like plaster. I mean, they looked like they were stone. They were actually plaster. And so after the fair, they got demolished. Some burned up. The Museum of Science and Industry was different because the substrate beneath the plaster was brick, because it was a Palace of Fine Arts. And countries were saying, we're not going to send you our art for you to put it in some plaster building. You have to build a real building for us. So as a result, it was covered in this plaster, but the bone of the building was brick. So there are images of it after the fair where it's kind of falling apart. And then Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, funds the restoration of the building, turning it into the Museum of Science and Industry. But that's the reason why it's still there.
Awesome. We have another question from Keisha. There are a lot of empty lots and land in Inglewood. What would you build on them?
Well, it depends on the lot, right? I think Inglewood is the community that people always ask, well, what's the community of tomorrow, right? And and I think that Inglewood is one, particularly the eastern edge of it. Between Halstead and Racine or something like that. One thing to watch out for in terms of what may appear on vacant lots. Well, let me just back up a bit. On 63rd Street and the main drags, I like to see retail buildings put there, and if not retail, because retail, who knows what retail looks like now. Buildings that could be devoted to arts and culture, something there to put some life on the street. Maybe mixed use buildings where there could be a small cultural space on the first floor and people living above. I think in the neighborhoods where you see all these vacant lots, I think that's, these are the times for houses when you can. There's a reasonably strong urban farming component in Inglewood, which I think has value. One thing that you may see under the mayor's Invest Southwest initiative is that at 63rd and just a few clicks west of Halstead, there's an old fire station, beautiful old fire station, 1929. And the idea is to use that fire station and some of the space around it to kind of build a town center, retail and housing around it. And the Invest Southwest program is willing to put some city cash into that. There's a request for proposals on the street now. You can get it if you look up Invest Southwest in Inglewood, you can see some concepts for it to give you an idea of what the city wants developers to respond with. So that's what I think it could happen and should happen in Inglewood.
Excellent. Okay, we have a comment from one of our longtime patrons. The library, typically when we're in normal times, gives people an opportunity to get on a bus and go places. And so the comment is that a long time ago, the library had an outing in Pullman and Beverly, and it's time to go back to other areas of the South Side when we can return to normal programming. So I will pass that along. Excellent suggestion.
I agree.
And then we've got a comment from Bill who says, hi, great presentation. The South Side was a great place for many movie palaces. My mother was a theater organist many years ago. The Paradise, Tivoli, Marlborough are sadly all gone, but the Avalon Theater is still there. She often talked about that theater. What is the status of the Avalon now? And are there any other theater buildings still standing?
You know, this is one of the heartbreaks of the book, where there's a chapter at the end where I talk about the buildings that I wish I could have gotten to, but they were gone. And I talk about the Rialto, the row of movie theaters that stretched from Stony Island to the east to Western, really, on the west, and all of them are gone. The Avalon Theater at 79th and South Chicago is still there. Interesting history, right? Because it was a church, a big giant church when I was a kid, and then in I want to say 81, 82, 83, maybe even 87, the Gardners, Ed and Betty Ann Gardner, African Americans who owned Soft Sheen, one of the hair companies that was headquartered, national hair companies, hair care companies that was headquartered on the South Side, bought the building, and they renamed it the New Regal Theater as an ode to the old Regal Theater, which got torn down at 47th Street, where the likes of James Brown and Jackie Wilson and all those people played. It was like the Regal Theater, the original Regal Theater, was like our Apollo, right, theater in New York. The idea was to bring that luster back into this new theater. And, for the first 10 years or so, it was really successful. I mean, there were, rap concerts, Smokey Robinson, Phyllis Hyman. I mean, it did what it was supposed to do. Then at some point, it falls under different ownerships. And the odd thing about it is there was a woman, I cannot think of her name, but she actually called me up, and I worked in the mayor's office, and I said, I can't say anything to you. But long story short, this woman, who was like a captain or something in one of the suburban police departments, she had worked for the city and then went south. She somehow got enough money and restored the interior. And it is the finest theater interior that those of us who are alive now will ever see. This kind of crazy Arabian Nights, atmospheric, movie theater. It's beautiful. A young guy owns it now. And if there's a part 2 to this book, that's going to be in it. But for some reason, he can't make a go of it. He's gotten not much help from the city to make a go of it. So the building kind of sits there, drifting in and out of building court. The interior is beautiful. The exterior gives you pause. So that's the long answer to the question, but that's what's happening now.
A couple of comments. Fabulous and fun presentation. Thank you. I agree. Fabulous and fun. Kovas would like to know, are there other groups similar to the Rebuild Foundation that are working to reutilize existing architecture?
I think Emmanuel Pratt's Sweetwater Foundation is probably going to do that. I mean, that's kind of the next step, I would say, without speaking for Emmanuel's, for Brother Platt's thing. He won a MacArthur grant over the past year or so. So, he's got some bandwidth to consider things. There in Houston, and I only bring this up because there's a thing called Project Row Houses, which really kind of does more of what I wish the Astors would do, which is not only just save the assets, but use it to somehow allow it to spark other development in the neighborhoods. The Astors work kind of hasn't done that yet, right? Rick Lowe, who runs, also a MacArthur Fellow, was sniffing around Chicago a couple of years ago, and I was thinking, I hope he stays, and I hope he's able to do something here. But I think he ended up going back to Houston. I don't know what he was doing here, but so the answer is there really isn't, and part of the reason, and I don't want to sound negative, is that to do what Rebuild does, which is great work, take these unused spaces and repurpose them, it takes a lot of money, obviously. And that money is coming in the form of foundations. And foundations are fickle, right? I mean, they'll fund this today and something else tomorrow. And what has to happen is that these endeavors have to somehow get on the path to pay their own freight. And that's the tough thing. Or if they can't pay their own freight, they have to be able to catalyze development around it, or something around it, so that at least the funders can say, listen, we paid for the Arts Bank, we paid for this, and out of this part of the city, this part of this street, Stony Island, this part of 71st Place is coming back now. What tends to happen is that the Astor's pieces exist, they're fantastic, but there's no bounce. And I think that's the issue.
It's a shame. All the conditions have to align correctly to make magic happen. It seems
exactly
like a no-brainer, and then you get into the details and it's so much more complicated than it, I wish it were. So a follow-up comment to a library field trip to the unexplored South Side. This person, Bobby, would be interested in having you be our docent, so I will pass that along.
Thank you.
That would be marvelous for us if you would like a part-time job. And then we have one more comment. Thank you for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
So we're almost at the end of our time. If there are no additional comments or questions anybody has. Oh, fascinating, lively, excellent. I agree with all of that.
Thank you. It was fun to do, and great questions too.
So interesting. And I feel like those churches could be turned into mixed-use buildings of some sort and like address some of the other, I don't know, other issues. I would hate to see those beautiful buildings disappear forever.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. It's really great. Oh, one more. Can you name the Inglewood organization one more time?
Was it Sweetwater Foundation? And maybe they're looking
at Invest Southwest.
Invest Southwest. So that's a initiative by the city of the mayor's office, and not an organization, but the idea is to invest literally in retail districts, largely on the south and west side. So there's 10 that they've got identified, and the requests for proposals for the first 3 are kind of on the streets now.
No, last minute question. What was the movie theater name?
There was the Avalon Theater, named after the place that King Arthur pulled the sword out, I think, of the stone is Avalon. And it used to be the new Regal Theater, which was now you want to see something? Okay, now I want to run over. You want to see a heartbreaking loss? Look up they're all heartbreaking, but look up the Southtown Theater. It's mentioned in the book, Southtown, and it was at 63rd and Low, I think it is, in Inglewood. Now, many of the buildings that were movie theaters that were demolished, you could say they were demolished before the age of enlightenment, right? 1975 and that kind of thing, before we really knew to save these kind of structures. The Southtown, which was a Spanish Art Deco building, and I guarantee you've never seen Spanish Art Deco any place, let alone in Chicago, was wrecked in 1991. I ended up covering it for the daily Southtown before I came to the Sun-Times. But you can look on and see these heartbreaking images of this 4,200 seat theater and this lobby with a flamingo fountain, with a flamingo pool. It's just a fantastic piece of architecture that you're just sad to see it go.
Yeah. I work with a librarian who, lifelong Chicago resident, who loves to show me, he follows a blog that I don't remember the name of, but it's all kinds of like photos of old downtown, and he would tell me about movie houses that used to exist in the suburb where I live that he used to be able to walk to that are no longer there.
It's a shame.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just sad.
Oh, Bobby Sloan mentions the Granada Theater. That was Spanish Art Deco. You're right, Bobby. Yeah.
And I keep thinking of, I used to live in Uptown. And so, the Uptown Theater, like every year that it is not demolished is a year that I'm grateful because like you just keep waiting for it to come down with, the Riv and the Aragon. And I'm going to mispronounce your name, so I apologize. But Machiko is saying, wow, looking at the Southtown image right now.
It is, and if you go to the library and read the book, there's a passage about the Southtown, which the theater part, 4,200 seats, still existed when the lobby was open and used for a flea market. The lobby was that big that the lobby was a store by itself. They closed off the theater, and Henry, my best friend to this day, and we talked the owner into letting us slip behind the partition and go in the theater. It scared the bejesus out of me. But because you could feel this big dark space, but it was still beautiful. They tore it down, that may have been 86, and then by 91, they torn it down.
What a shame.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if there are any last minute questions, comments, we have another great webinar. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is fascinating. And again, I would encourage you guys, if you haven't had an opportunity to lay hands on the library's copy, put yourself on hold for it. It is such a great resource. I mean, it's a work of art, but it's also such a great resource.
Thank you.
For people to just learn a little bit more about this space that we all live in, and grow your understanding of your hometown. All right. Oh, wait, one last question.
Sure.
Oh, one more. Thank you very much. Great seeing you again. I saw you lecture at the Harold Washington Public Library. Thanks again.
Thank you. I thought the name was familiar. Well, great. Good to see you again as well.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And, thank you again to Jane Rozak for continuing to recruit such amazing speakers for our Chicagoland Read All About It series. And thank you once again, Mr. Lee, for gracing us with this incredible program tonight.
My pleasure. Yeah.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
All right. Take care, everyone. Take care.